Welcome to Weekly Pulse, your heartbeat to what's trending in sports. Last week we saw the return of Major League Baseball, and as we know, it didn't exactly go as smoothly as they'd hoped. Now it's the NBA's turn to resume games, and it sure seems like the bubble is working with 0 cases of coronavirus being reported. That said, we're here to help you get all caught up on the storylines you may have forgotten before the action paused. We enlist USA Today Sports' Jeff Zilgett to give us his prediction on who he thinks will go all the way, as well as some teams who may surprise us. Finally, we sit down with former NASCAR CEO and chairman Brian France to discuss the social justice movement that swept the sport and his pride in seeing Bubba Wallace get the support from his fellow drivers. Yes, it looks a little different than where it left off. COVID happened, the country rallied behind a social justice movement, and a lot of other off-the-court stuff happened. Need a little refresh? We got you. LeBron, Kawhi, and Giannis were all playing at an MVP level, and guess what? They're all rested. That should be a nightmare for any other team in the bubble. Not even Freddy Krueger wants that smoke. The Heat hype does exist, and they were on fire prior to the shutdown. And without any real star power besides Jimmy Butler. A 41-24 record through 65 games with rookies Kendrick Nunn and Tyler Herro exceeding expectations proved Miami's got the heat. And the best part of no fans is we can hear everything Jimmy Butler says. Too bad the Timberwolves weren't good enough to make it into the bubble. The NBA, the Pelicans, are trying to get Zion that 8th seed. Zion left the bubble, but came back just in time and will start in their first game against the Jazz. With the easiest schedule of the teams in Orlando, the first game against the Jazz will tell us a lot. Speaking of the Jazz, let's not forget Rudy Gobert represented the first domino to fall after contracting COVID-19. Regardless if he and Donovan Mitchell are on good terms now or not, it's not an AAU summer camp trophy they're playing for. But does it even matter? The Jazz in the playoffs are like their home state of Utah. Just a pit stop on your way to LA. Speaking of weird chemistry, something's brewing in Philly. What's more stable, Ben and Kendall or Ben and Joel? 3+ months in the bubble, we will definitely figure out the latter. Speaking of utility in the playoffs, the Rockets. Harden, Westbrook, and the small ball squad are trying to finally make fetch happen and get to the finals. Note to Houston, fetch is never gonna happen. Boston. Is it possible for the Boston Celtics to be a sneaky title contender? It absolutely is. Jason Tatum, the floor is yours. Finally, we can't leave out the Nuggets and the Raptors. 2 teams who can no doubt be the rulers of Magic Kingdom by season's end. Oh, and my favorite thing since the bubble opened up, the snitch hotline. I'm not sure if we'll ever know who called about Dwight Howard not wearing his mask. It was probably Doc Rivers who said he's calling on everyone. We do know it wasn't John Morant who said, "I see nothing, I hear nothing, I ain't saying nothing." Keeping up with the NBA really should be a reality show in itself. So, let's get ready for a season finale.
I'm going to start off with LeBron James and the Los Angeles Lakers. I'm looking at teams that have some veteran leadership, quality players, and you have LeBron. He's seen it all. He hasn't seen this in the playoffs, but he has seen just about everything else. And when you add that up alongside a player like Anthony Davis, who was having a fantastic season when the season was suspended earlier this season, you put those two together, you have 2 great players on the court. You have the veteran leadership of LeBron, and then he's surrounded by some other veteran players as well. Danny Green won a championship last year with the Toronto Raptors. Rajon Rondo has championship under his belt with the Boston Celtics, had many deep playoff runs. And so that's a team that top seed in the West. I expect them to finish as the top seed and get to the NBA Finals. And the Eastern Conference, I don't know if it's any more wide open, but Milwaukee has had such a great season. I fully expect them to make a deep playoff run, but they're going to have their challenges as well. There's a couple teams in the East that could give them a really difficult time. The Boston Celtics are a wild card. If they start to play some great basketball with Jason Tatum leading the way, that's a team that I could see making a surprise run. And the team really no one has given a lot of attention to this year, despite being the defending NBA champions, is the Toronto Raptors. Even though they lost Kawhi Leonard to the Clippers in the offseason, the Raptors were still on pace to win 58, 59 games this year. And I'm talking about these teams that have veteran leadership, experience into the playoffs. That's the Toronto Raptors. With all that said, I still like the Milwaukee Bucks to get to the finals from the Eastern Conference. Giannis Antetokounmpo, is on track to win his second consecutive MVP award. Chris Middleton is a player on the court who the Bucks need to rely on, and I think they can. And I think they have enough complementary parts around Chris Middleton and Giannis Antetokounmpo to get to the NBA Finals. I'm envisioning that Milwaukee-Los Angeles Finals, and at that point, I'm just going to rely a little bit on experience in that situation and being able to handle the difficulty of it, and I would lean towards the Los Angeles Lakers right now. If you're looking at a couple of teams that are not in the first, second, third, or fourth place right now in the East or the West that could make a deep run into the playoffs, let's take a couple of teams, one from each conference. And let's start with the Houston Rockets in the West. If James Harden and Russell Westbrook play some of their best basketball, that's a dangerous team. I don't know if Houston is going to end up as the 6th seed or the 5th seed, but if you're a team that ends up playing them in the first round as the 3 seed or the 4 seed, that Rockets team is not a team that you're going to want to see. They have a lot of talent on the court. They're using this small ball philosophy that GM Daryl Morey and Coach Mike D'Antoni really love to throw out there on the court. Now, that may change a little bit in the playoffs, but when you have two great players like Westbrook and Harden, MVP caliber players, that could be a really difficult team to play for a lot of different teams. And so if somehow the Rockets ended up in the conference finals, that wouldn't surprise me one bit. Now, let's take a team from the East that isn't in the top 4 right now, and that's the Philadelphia 76ers. They also have a lot riding on this season. A lot was expected out of them this year. They went to the conference semifinals last year before losing to the Toronto Raptors. But here's what you have to watch for. Ben Simmons is healthy. Joel Embiid looks like he's fired up to play. And the Sixers are not a team right now that relies on the three-pointer. That may work out in their favor. We don't know how teams are going to shoot the ball since they haven't really played or practiced much the past 4 months. And not relying on the three-pointer could really work in Philadelphia's favor. And here's another thing to consider. The Sixers, before the season was suspended, they were 29-2 at home. They were only 10-24 on the road. Now, this is essentially a neutral court. If the Sixers play like the team they did when they were at home during the regular season, 29-2, almost unbeatable, that's the kind of team that could make a surprising and deep run as well.
When you saw all of Bubba Wallace's fellow drivers standing behind him and walking with him, I'm sure that was a very proud moment for you. What were your emotions when you saw that?
I don't get emotional about too many things, but I must say that was one of those moments for me in all of sports that I went, wow. I felt super proud. I wasn't surprised because I know how people really feel. But the way they did it and the way Fox covered it, which was very, very well done, I thought that moment would go down in history as one of the turning points in this area for not only NASCAR, but for all of sports. The idea that the teams and the drivers would rally around Bubba was a special moment.
What is your advice for commissioners and league leadership as it pertains to embracing player protests, the Black Lives Movement, and all the other different activities that the athletes in different sports are actively participating in?
I'll tell you how we thought about it when I was the CEO of NASCAR. One is, let's take the race issue. We always want to be in step with our values, number one. Number two, with where society is on their way to and needs to end up at. And in this case, for me, having dealt with, founded our diversity program 15 years ago, worked tirelessly to get African Americans, Hispanics, and other participants within the sport, and accomplished a lot. And one of the things that we did was around the flag, which is now a new issue, or looks like a new issue. It's actually not a new issue for NASCAR. But when things happened like in South Carolina 4 or 5 years ago, with the shooting, and then Nikki Haley took the flag down in South Carolina. I thought it was important for us to take that symbol, the Confederate flag. We're a Southern sport. It can be a little tricky, but I thought it was important to not have that flag flying anywhere at NASCAR events. So I banned it in 2015. So I think what you're seeing with the league commissioners now with Black Lives, the movement, and other things where society is making real shifts, and they're good shifts, and they're shifts that are consistent with the values of not only the commissioners, but importantly, the owners and the players and the participants. So everybody in sports likes to do it in a rallying way, to be supportive of one another's view when they're going in the same direction.
Coming up, we continue our conversation with Brian France and ask him to lend his expertise and knowledge of sports business to break down the many obstacles that college sports could be facing this upcoming fall. It's time for more Weekly Pulse.
The possibility of no college football, especially in the SEC, talk about the financial ramifications of that. And if you were a member of the SEC, one of the schools, what do you do in order to recoup some of the capital that you're going to be losing?
Well, I think the first thing that you want to do is recognize, and they all do, that of how many other sports will be affected if they don't play the season. It's frankly catastrophic if that were to happen in college football. I'm thinking that they're going to look at all the options that they can to play the season. Maybe an abbreviated one. It may look different. It may be only conference games and maybe neutral sites, maybe a lot of different ways to look at safety. I'm very concerned that going dark for the entire year in the season, that would be that would have ramifications you may not be able to get back.
Sticking with college sports, the topic of name, image, and likeness, college athletes profiting off of their own name, image, and likeness. What's your take on that?
I think it's a very slippery slope. I think it benefits only a few in terms of of players and students. I think it is full of all kinds of trap doors to fall through, and I'm hopeful that it's an area I know very well, that when you get into endorsement and what's my rights and who's in charge of the license, the brand, it can take away the fundamental essence of what it means to be a college athlete, and it can also create unfair advantages in recruiting and in the competitive balance of different conferences and leagues. I think it's a very, very slippery slope that has to be thought out much better than currently. At least the ideas that I've seen do not balance these issues correctly.
So Brian, now you're involved with Silver Falcon Capital, working in the restaurant, hospitality, and sports spaces. Tell me a little bit about Silver Falcon Capital and what you do with the organization.
Well, one of the things you get a chance to do as a leader in sports is you work on a lot of intellectual property and media rights and extending brands and working with partners. So we end up building a lot of relationships. We end up building a lot of knowledge and so on about how people think about what, how do you extend brands? How do you grow the value of intellectual property? We did that a lot at NASCAR, of course. So I'm extending that with Silver Falcon into businesses. We're doing it ourselves with our own capital. so we can take a long view. It's fun for me because I love the entrepreneurial side of growing things. So we're getting in the ground floor of different companies, working with young, energetic, smart people where we can put our capital, all the resources and knowledge that I've learned, and all the mistakes I've made over 30 plus years of doing this. So we're having fun making, hopefully good decisions and partnering with the right people.
That does it for this week's episode of Weekly Pulse. Big time sports weekend ahead of us. Believe it or not, we will have the NBA, MLB, and NHL all back in action. Here's a tip. Be in front of the TV when Zion Williamson and the Pelicans take on John Morant and the Grizzlies Saturday night. Two of the NBA's rising stars will surely put on a show for us, and I'm here for it. Until next week, I'm Mackenzie Salmon.